Hello, my dear emperors. I'm Marco, and tonight we're drifting into the story of human civilization, I guess. Why I guess? Because this isn't your usual history lecture. Here, we don't just talk about humanity, we speak as if you were one of them. This is a second-person journey, immersive, a little sarcastic, and meant to carry you gently into sleep while your mind wanders through time. From the first campfire sparks on the African savannah to the digital pulses of modern metropolises, from stone tools to nuclear treaties. This story doesn't start in a textbook. It begins with bare feet, a hungry stomach, and the stubborn, ridiculous belief that you can make something better. So if you're up for it, let the world fade, dim the lights, and join me. You are nobody, really. Just another tribesman in the rugged steppes of late 13th century Anatolia. The Mongols are throwing their usual tantrums to the east, the Byzantines are wheezing to the west, and the Seljuk Sultanate, your supposed overlords, are more fragmented than a teenager's Wi-Fi connection. And yet here you are, a Turkic nomad with little more than a horse, a sword, and a stubborn belief that your tribe is meant for more. The land is poor, the winters are brutal, but you've got ambition in your saddlebag. Your name, Osman. Or maybe you're just the kind of guy people look at and say, he's got main character energy. Either way, your tribe follows you like you're Moses, except you're headed toward more land, not freedom. You call your people the Kai, which allegedly means the one who has might. You don't correct anyone who says otherwise. Branding matters. You start out in Sogut, a sleepy frontier town that could be described as rustic if one were being generous. But you're clever. You see the disintegrating Seljuks and think, why not step in? You swear nominal loyalty to their ghost government, just enough to keep the paperwork flowing, and then do your own thing anyway. Historians still argue whether this was cunning politics or a happy accident. Either way, you begin to carve out a little something resembling power. Your raids against the Byzantines, bold, maybe reckless, but every successful skirmish gets you land, loot, and more followers. They come not because you're rich or noble, you're not, but because you promise spoils and stability. You're not offering heaven, you're offering farmland, in a world where both feel equally mythical. And then of course the dreams. Yes, those dreams. You tell people you saw a tree growing out of your chest, its branches covering the world. Interpretations vary wildly. Some say it's divine prophecy, others think you should ease off the fermented mare's milk. But the dream spreads, and once people believe you're blessed, well, things move fast. You start calling your territory a Belak, which sounds fancier than stuff I stole. But you're not entirely lawless. You mix tribal customs with Islamic principles. And just like that, you're not just a warrior, you're a founder. You appoint judges, administer taxes, and even set up a proto-bureaucracy, which mostly means your cousin now carries a clipboard. The Byzantines, of course, are too distracted, collapsing, to notice you gobbling up towns along the Sakarya River. And even if they did notice, they'd probably need a month-long council meeting just to issue a strongly worded scroll. By the time you die of old age, no less, which in your line of work is like winning the lottery, your territory has expanded, your followers are loyal, and your son Orhan is already sharpening his ambitions. You're buried in Bursa, eventually, and legends begin to circle like vultures, with a flair for storytelling. Some say you never lost a battle, others say you glowed while sleeping. You neither confirm nor deny. That's part of the mystique. It wasn't supposed to be an empire, you know. It was supposed to be survival. A tribe with a charismatic leader scraping by on the margins of crumbling empires. But now your name, Osman, has taken root. And that dream of a tree? It's starting to look suspiciously like a family tree. But the real conquests, the silk robes, the palaces with fountains in the hallways, that's your son's problem. For now, rest easy knowing you built something from dust, daring to believe that a forgotten tribe might become history's main character. And what a character you'll be. You are Orhan now, which means technically you're a prince, or at least the closest thing your ragtag sword-swinging proto-state has to royalty Your dad Osman left you some pretty prime real estate in northwestern Anatolia, a growing fan club of Ghazis, holy warriors, or just warriors with good branding, and an open invitation to expand into lands that are definitely not yours yet. You start by eyeing Bursa, not because it's flashy. Bursa is still a sleepy Byzantine holdout, but because it's strategic. It's nestled against the mountains, it controls trade routes, and most importantly, it sits on silk. That's right, real shimmering gold-threaded nobility will fight you for its silk. And you've got siege tactics, and an army of people who believe destiny wears a turban. Bursa falls in 1326, not with a bang, but a slow, persistent chokehold. You blockade, you starve, and eventually the Byzantines give up the keys like a defeated landlord. And just like that, you go from tribal warlord to urban administrator. Suddenly, you have infrastructure, taxes, aqueducts, brickwork. You start building mosques and madrasas and bathhouses, because even empires need exfoliation. Here's where things get spicy. You issue the first coins stamped with the family name, Ottoman, derived from Osman. No more calling yourselves the Kai tribe or those Turkish guys who raided us last week. Branding upgrade unlocked. Historians still argue whether you were consciously building an empire or just riding a really long wave of conquest momentum. Either way, it looks suspiciously like statecraft. You also pull off something subtly brilliant. You don't just conquer land, you absorb people. Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, Christians, Jews, Muslims, as long as they pay taxes and don't stab anyone important, you let them keep their lives, their languages, and sometimes even their churches. You're not trying to erase cultures, you're trying to monetize them. But let's not pretend you've gone soft. You're still expanding. The Byzantines are increasingly irrelevant, their emperor practically shouting into the void from a crumbling throne in Constantinople. You, meanwhile, cross into Thrace. That's right, Europe. And for the first time, Europe looks less like a distant dream and more like an appetizer. Enter Gallipoli. A bit of an accident, really. An earthquake in 1354 knocks out the Byzantine defences, and you, being ever so helpful, move in under the guise of protecting the area. A few tents become a garrison becomes a fortress. Suddenly you're not just playing defence, you've got a permanent foothold on the European side of the Bosphorus. Gallipoli becomes your launch pad, your trampoline into the Balkans. It's also the moment everyone in Constantinople starts hyperventilating. And back home, Bursa becomes your capital, the city your father dreamed of, but never saw fully shine. You bury him there, under a modest tomb, with a kind of reverence that makes future generations assume he was 10 feet tall and glowed in the dark. You're not flashy, you don't write poems like your grandson will, or carve palaces like your great-grandsons will, but you stabilize, you systematize, you turn the cult of Osman into a functioning machine. Your reign doesn't just extend borders, it builds the operating system. By the time you die, peacefully, you've set the Ottomans on a path toward real empirehood. You leave behind not just land, but a sense of inevitability. Your sons and grandsons won't need to invent an empire, they'll inherit it, complete with bureaucrats, building codes, and a surprisingly efficient tax collection system enforced by dudes with very pointy swords. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Your legacy is still marinating. For now, enjoy the view from Bursa. You took a gamble, and the odds, like the coins, are now forever stamped in your favor. You're Murad now, Orhan's son, and let's be honest, you're the heir who's inherited more than just a title. You're holding a snowball that's already rolling downhill, gathering weight and speed. All you really have to do is not trip over your own robes. But of course, you're not just holding on to power, you want to be the one who makes it sing. So you do what all ambitious heirs do, you double down. First, you formalize the thing your grandfather started with a wink and a sword. You institutionalize conquest. That means logistics. That means taxes, records, ledgers, systems. The Ottoman war machine becomes not just a roving band of Ghazis, but a bureaucratized apparatus of holy destruction, like a startup with a mission statement, but with more horse archers. You also create something new, something that makes historians tingle and libertarians shudder. The Janissaries. You take young Christian boys from the Balkans through a system called Devshirme, convert them to Islam, and raise them as elite soldiers, loyal only to you. It's equal parts genius and terrifying. You're making warriors from your enemy's children. It's like fan fiction, but state-sponsored. Now you march into the Balkans, and suddenly conquest starts feeling efficient. Cities fall. Serbian princes grovel. You beat the Bulgarians like it's a board game. The Battle of Maritsa in 1371, a massacre. You rout a larger Serbian army with such humiliating ease. Local poets switch from writing elegies to awkward silence. And yet, for all your victories, you're not cruel. You don't burn cities to the ground just because you can. You offer vassalage, pay your dues, kiss the ring, and you can keep your local customs and funny hats. Your empire is expanding, not through annihilation, but through absorption. That makes you more viral than violent. You're not just a sultan, you're an algorithm. But here's where it gets theatrical. The Serbs and Hungarians decide they've had enough of being politely conquered, so they form a coalition, and you meet them at the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. It's brutal. You win, technically, but you're also assassinated by a Serbian noble pretending to surrender. That's right, you get knifed in the middle of your victory dance. The moment becomes legendary. Your son, Bayezid, is crowned right there on the battlefield. No coronation ceremony, no feasts, just blood and urgency. It's dramatic and maybe a little poetic, but mostly it's a logistical nightmare. Bayezid has to stabilize the army while wiping your blood off his new boots. Historians still argue whether the Battle of Kosovo was a clear Ottoman victory or a Pyrrhic mess. But one thing's certain, it establishes the Ottomans as the power in the Balkans. The Christian states realize they're not dealing with opportunistic raiders anymore. They're dealing with a force that builds schools as quickly as it builds tombs. And while your death cuts your reign short, your legacy becomes mythic. You're not just Murad I, you're Murad the Martyr. Your name echoes in mosques and war songs. Your Janissaries, once experimental, become the backbone of Ottoman power for centuries. And your approach, absorb, reform, stabilize, becomes the unspoken creed of future sultans. So sleep now, Murad. You gambled like Orhan, dreamed like Osman, and gave the empire not just victories, but a spine. Your death may have come too soon, but your systems, your military, your government, your cult of order march on without you, and they won't stop marching anytime soon. You're Bayezid now. They call you Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, not because you're fast, though, okay, you kind of are, but because you strike with shocking ferocity. You were crowned on a battlefield, still warm with your father's blood, and from that moment forward, you rule like a man who knows the clock is ticking and the gods are watching. Your first move, finish the Balkans. Serbia, bent the knee. Wallachia, check. Bulgaria, you steamroll it like you're flattening dough for baklava. You even take Thessaloniki from the Venetians, which is like stealing candy from a child, except the child has a navy and a grudge. But you don't care. You're Bayezid, and diplomacy is for people with less impressive mustaches. You also decide that it's high time Constantinople felt the pressure. You don't take the city, that's someone else's bedtime story, but you do surround it so thoroughly that the Byzantines basically become glorified landlords paying rent to you. They're technically still an empire, but only in the same way that Blockbuster is technically still a company. And then you do something bold, possibly foolish, definitely spicy. You declare yourself Sultan, not just Bey or Emir, but full-on Sultan of Rum. That's Rome in Islamic terminology. And yes, you're throwing historical shade at both the Byzantines and the legacy of the Abbasids in one go. Historians still argue whether it was brilliant branding or an overreach that painted a target on your back. Spoiler, it was both. You rule from Edirne now, a grand city near the Bulgarian border. You build mosques, public kitchens and hammams like you're trying to win an empire-wide SimCity challenge. Your courts hum with scholars and poets, but you also become impatient. You want it all, and you want it quickly. You barely let your conquests breathe before you push further. Then comes Timur. Oh, Timur, the Central Asian warlord with a limp, a divine complex, and a thirst for Ottoman blood. You've never met a man who mirrors your ambition so perfectly, and that's exactly the problem. You both believe you're the true heir to the Muslim world. You both have empires made of bones and bureaucracy, and neither of you is particularly interested in sharing. In 1402, the showdown happens, the Battle of Ankara. You march east with your proud, polished army, janissaries gleaming, banners fluttering. You've got confidence, experience, and well, unfortunately, a complete underestimation of Timur's tactics. He brings elephants, real ones, and also spies and betrayal. Some of your vassals switch sides mid-battle because nothing says loyalty like stabbing your overlord mid-siege. You lose, badly. Your army scatters. Your sons start fighting each other like they're auditioning for a family-themed Game of Thrones. And you get captured. Yes, the Thunderbolt, locked in a cage, reportedly humiliated, while Timur glares at you across a banquet table like a disappointed uncle. You die in captivity. Some say suicide, some say illness. All agree, not your finest hour. And yet, your legacy isn't erased. You pushed the empire's borders further than ever before. You centralized power. You built, taxed, governed. You weren't just thunder, you were infrastructure. And even in your fall, you taught the Ottomans something critical. That expansion without caution is a coin flip with fate, and fate is moody. Your sons will take years to clean up the mess, but they'll also inherit your fire, your title, and your stubborn refusal to settle. So rest, Bayezid. You flew too close to the sun, yes, but your empire didn't burn. It merely blinked, and the story? Oh, it's just getting started. You are Mehmed now, but not just any Mehmed. You are that Mehmed. Mehmed II, the one whose name will echo through stone walls and marble corridors long after the dust settles. You're born into chaos, the kind that would make lesser dynasties buckle. Your father Murad II retires not once, but twice, and every time he does, the Balkans catch fire like it's a seasonal tradition. You take the throne as a teenager, lose it, and then return like a sequel that's way better than the original. From day one your eyes are set on Constantinople, that stubborn, aging, glorious relic of a city that's been choking your empire like a chicken bone in a throat. For nearly 1100 years, it stood unbroken, defying armies, sieges, and the slow death of Roman authority. But you, Mehmed, are not another pretender. Your destiny in a velvet robe. You prepare meticulously. You don't just knock on Constantinople's door. You build a cannon big enough to punch it open. Literally. You commission a Hungarian engineer, Orban, to construct the Basilica cannon, a beast so massive it has its own logistical nightmare. It fires once every few hours. But when it does, the walls of Constantinople remember the shot like a trauma therapist. And then on May 29th, 1453, after 53 days of siege, starvation and stone-cracking bombardment, you break through. The final assault is brutal. You send wave after wave until the defenders can't even lift their swords. You walk through the Theodosian walls like you're inheriting a birthright. A Christian emperor falls. An Islamic sultan rises. The city changes hands and fates. You enter Hagia Sophia. You don't burn it, like some expected. You convert it, a symbol of divine conquest. Not out of disrespect, but to reframe the narrative. Rome didn't fall today. It evolved. And you, at just 21 years old, have done what countless others failed to even attempt. You've taken the most coveted city in the world. And you rename it, well, eventually, Istanbul, though everyone keeps calling it Constantinople for like 500 more years because inertia is real. You rebuild the city with care. invite back Greek merchants, Jewish artisans, Muslim scholars. You don't purge, you blend. It's not about erasing the past, it's about layering over it. Historians still argue whether you saw yourself more as Caesar or Caliph. Honestly, probably both. You model your rule on Roman law, but declare yourself the sword of Islam. You surround yourself with advisors who quote Plato and generals who swing scimitars. Your court becomes a strange, glorious hybrid of East and West, draped in brocade and bureaucracy. And you keep expanding. Serbia, taken, Bosnia, absorbed, the Black Sea, basically your swimming pool now. You build a navy, something the Ottomans had barely bothered with, and you use it to pressure Venice like you're trying to get a refund. You also dabble in poetry. Under the pen name Avni, you write verses about love and longing, because why not conquer hearts while you're at it? One of your poems casually compares your soul to a nightingale, and the beloved's curls to chains. Subtle flex. Even your metaphors dominate. But you're not without shadows. You execute your own brother to prevent civil war, setting a grisly precedent that future sultans take way too seriously. And you centralize power so tightly that breathing too independently in court becomes a political liability. Still, when you die in 1481, your coffin has to be carried by dozens, not just because it's heavy with gold, but because it contains the weight of an empire no longer regional but imperial. You were a teenager once, dismissed and doubted, and now you're Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who broke the walls and rebuilt the world. Sleep soundly, Mehmed. The city is yours, and the empire, it's only just begun to stretch. You are Istanbul now. Well, not literally, but you are the Sultan in charge of it, and that's basically the same thing. You've inherited not just a city but a symbol. Istanbul, was once the beating heart of the Roman Empire, and now it's yours. But unlike a new toy you play with then forget, you obsess over it. You want this place to mean something again. So you rebuild, not like a conqueror showing off, but like an artist with a civic planner's diploma. You invite Muslims, Christians, Jews, anyone who knows how to work a loom, write a contract, or build something taller than a camel. You're not interested in blood purity, you're interested in cash flow and cosmic legacy. You want Istanbul to thrum with diversity, bureaucracy, and spice markets, so overwhelming they make grown men cry. First you clean up Hagia Sophia. You turn the old church into a mosque. Yes, but you keep its bones. You add minarets, but preserve mosaics. It becomes your cathedral, your temple, your architectural mic drop. Historians still argue whether you preserved it out of respect or strategic aesthetic, because nothing says we've arrived like redecorating your enemy's palace with your own curtains. Then you build Topkapi Palace, not one of those sad defensive European castles with drafty halls and moat-related traumas. No, Topkapi is a sprawling maze of courtyards, fountains, libraries, and hidden doors. It smells like rosewater and politics. It becomes the beating heart of Ottoman administration, and later a stage for more court drama than a season of Succession. And here's a quirky detail. You set up the harem not just as a sensual playground, but as a political engine. It's where imperial women, often well-educated and terrifyingly strategic, begin pulling strings from behind embroidered curtains. It's also where future sultans are born, raised, and occasionally traumatized. Speaking of strategy, you roll out the millet system. Basically, you let each religious community run its own schools, courts, and taxes. Christians judge Christians. Jews judge Jews. Muslims judge everyone else. It's not tolerance exactly, but it's structured leniency, and it works. People stay loyal, not because they love you, but because you let them live with minimal interference. It's a low-drama dictatorship, efficient. Your infrastructure explodes. Aqueducts snake through the city like benevolent arteries. Public kitchens feed the poor. Public baths keep everyone clean, or at least clean-smelling. You even get into sewer management, which sounds unsexy until you realize it keeps plagues at bay most of the time. Culturally, oh, you glow. You commission calligraphy that whispers across silk. You patronize miniature painting, poetry, astronomy. Istanbul becomes the envy of Europe and the model for the Muslim world. Venetian merchants swoon, Persian poets weep, French ambassadors try not to look impressed. But there's a catch. Always is. As you refine the city, you also refine control. Bureaucracy expands like a glorious mushroom. Officials sprout new titles, new departments, new ledgers. Janissaries become not just soldiers, but guards, administrators, even enforcers of mood. The empire becomes more polished, but also, quietly, more paranoid. Still, things work. The trains don't run, because it's the 15th century, but the caravans do. Trade routes stretch from Cairo to Belgrade, from Mecca to Crimea, and Istanbul sits at the center, sipping its tea, counting its coins, and judging everyone's architecture. By now, you're not just ruling a city, you're orchestrating a message. The Ottomans are not Mongol barbarians. They are cultured, planned, permanent. And you, dear Sultan, are not just a warlord with good timing. You are the curator of a civilization. Sleep well tonight, knowing the domes rise because of you. The empire breathes through Istanbul's marble lungs. And for now, at least, its pulse is steady and strong. You are the Sultan, yes, but not alone. Not really. Not anymore. The palace you rule from, majestic as it is, hums with more than incense and diplomacy. There are shadows here, silk-draped, whisper-soft, deadly serious shadows. You're surrounded by viziers, eunuchs, scribes, guards, concubines, astrologers, and the occasional poet with dangerous opinions disguised as metaphors. Topkapi Palace is less a home and more a living organism, one that occasionally bites its own tail. And now, meet the inner circle. No, not your cabinet, not your janissaries, not even your mother, though we'll get to her. The real operators here are the Kızlar Ağası, the chief black eunuch, and his army of similarly maimed but politically enhanced colleagues. These men, taken from distant lands and reshaped by imperial logic, guard the harem and serve as conduits between the private and public realms. Sound ceremonial? Think again. They carry secrets like currency and messages like weapons. And then there's your mother, the Valide Sultan. Depending on who you are, she's either your warmest ally or your most passive-aggressive nightmare. In the best-case scenario, she's wise, loyal, and knows how to keep the harem from exploding into a soap opera with sharp objects. In the worst-case scenario, she's subtly staging a coup, using nothing but sarcasm and embroidery. The harem itself, not a den of indulgence as Western travellers love to fantasize, but a pressure cooker of ambition. Women here are educated, multilingual, and fiercely political. The mother of the heir gains power. The ones without sons form alliances. Gossip is currency. Favour is oxygen. And you sleep lightly, aware that lullabies can come with daggers. Back in the public wing, the Grand Vizier runs the daily grind of empire. He meets with ambassadors, coordinates taxes, leads military campaigns, basically does everything you'd rather not do before breakfast. You trust him until you don't, and when that day comes, you'll probably strangle him with a silk cord. Tradition after all. But the real challenge is balance. The Janissaries want more pay and less respect for authority. The religious scholars want stricter law and fewer dancing boys. The merchants want better tariffs. The poets want less censorship. And the architects want to keep building domes, even though the skyline already looks like an overachieving soap bubble. Historians still argue whether you, whoever you are in this generational relay of sultans, ever truly ruled alone. They debate how much policy came from your pen versus your mother's glare, your vizier's whisper, or your astrologer's nervous cough. But from inside the golden cage of Topkapi, it's clear. Ruling is a team sport where everyone plays dirty. And let's talk about rituals. You don't just get up and govern. You bathe, dress, meditate, consult omens, sip sherbet, then receive visitors according to a protocol so elaborate it makes Versailles look like a food court. Each bow, each phrase, each tile underfoot has meaning. You are less a man than a performance. Still, you do wield real power when you choose to. You approve military campaigns with a flick. You crush rebellions from a couch. You send ambassadors with orders sealed in wax and soaked in menace. But increasingly, you navigate currents, not command them. The palace is your throne and your trap. And yet for all this the empire works. Somehow, the streets of Istanbul stay swept. Taxes get collected eventually. The borders expand mostly. Trade flows. People worship, marry, eat and complain just like they do in every functioning society. But here they do it under domes, behind veils, in the name of a man they may never see who lives in a palace he barely controls. Sleep tonight, dear Sultan, but do so with one eye open. The curtains rustle more than they should, and your vizier is smiling a little too widely. Even in the empire of law, it's always personal. You are not a noble by birth. You weren't raised with silks or scepters. In fact, you barely remember your original name. One day you were a boy, a Christian boy in the Balkans, plucking stones by a river, or maybe shepherding goats through muddy hills. And then one afternoon a group of very polite, very firm Ottoman officials arrived. They said you were special, chosen, and just like that your life was no longer yours. This is devshirme, the blood tax, as some call it. A system both brutal and brilliant. You're taken from your family, converted to Islam, trained, educated, and then if you survive, assigned to one of the empire's most elite institutions. You're not a slave in the traditional sense. No, you're a janissary now, a walking paradox, a Christian-born, Muslim-raised soldier whose only loyalty is to the Sultan himself. And oh, what training! Your days are spent in discipline so fierce it makes monasteries look like summer camps. You learn swordplay, archery, tactics, theology, and enough calligraphy to write your own orders beautifully before enforcing them with a spear. You are moulded into a weapon, not just sharp, but elegant. The kind that doesn't just kill, it impresses while doing it. The janissaries are unlike any army in Europe. They're not nobles' sons or drunken mercenaries. They are engineered loyalty. You sleep in communal barracks, eat regimented meals, and live under a code so strict that stepping out of line earns you more than just a frown. The idea is simple. If your origins are erased, your identity becomes the empire. At first you are forbidden to marry, own property, or grow a beard, because heaven forbid you start feeling independent. But with power comes privilege, and soon these rules start bending. A little land here, a discreet wife there, and suddenly the janissaries are more than elite troops. They're a political class. You're proud, of course. Who wouldn't be? Marching in perfect formation through Istanbul, the crowd parting like the Red Sea, mothers holding up their babies just to glimpse you. You're the steel edge of Ottoman glory, the thunder beneath the Sultan's silk. But something interesting happens over time. The janissaries, once symbols of meritocracy, begin to ossify. Ambition turns into entitlement. Promotions are bought, not earned. Discipline erodes. And you, if you're lucky enough to live long and climb high, start caring more about your estates than your drills. Historians still argue whether the Janissary Corps was a masterpiece of human engineering or an elaborate form of soft kidnapping. Both, probably, and both worked until they didn't. Meanwhile, the devshirme system continues, with little boys vanishing from their villages every few years, replaced by echoes and legends. Some families resist, hide their sons, bribe the officials. Others offer them up like tribute to Olympus, hoping their child will return one day not as a farmer, but a pasha. It's all part of the Ottoman paradox. Your army is both foreign and loyal, enslaved and revered. It terrifies the empire's enemies, and sometimes its own citizens. And in the hallowed halls of Topkapi, the Janissary Aghars, your commanders whisper into the Sultan's ears, push policies, remove enemies. With enough influence, you could topple a vizier. With a bad harvest or a missed paycheck, you could topple a sultan. And when revolt does come, as it will, centuries later, it won't be from peasants with pitchforks. It will be from within, from Janissaries themselves, grown fat, angry, and nostalgic for a golden age that might never have really existed. But for now, you shine, your boots polished, your scimitar curved to aesthetic perfection. You represent not just force but design. The empire believes in its ability to turn outsiders into insiders, strangers into brothers, Christians into defenders of Islam. Rest tonight, Janissary. The drums may call you at dawn, and when they do, you'll march not just for conquest, but for the strange alchemical dream that once pulled you from a Balkan hillside and made you into something more. You are Suleiman now, and you don't just inherit an empire, you inherit its contradictions, its ambitions, and its overachiever complex. They will call you the Magnificent, but not to your face, of course. In your own court, you're Kanuni, the lawgiver, because while others ruled with swords, you write the fine print that makes the swords legal. You rise to power in 1520. You're 30-ish tall, well-read, a poet, and suspiciously good-looking, like if a Renaissance statue came to life and had strong opinions on tax reform. Your early reign? Oh, it's a mood. You crush a Hungarian army so thoroughly at the Battle of Mohacs that the kingdom dissolves like sugar in tea. Budapest becomes Ottoman. Vienna quivers. Europe gets very into church attendance again. But it's not just conquest. You're curating an empire. You restructure laws so that property rights, religious customs, and trade codes harmonize like a well-conducted orchestra. You're not rewriting Islam, you're clarifying the user manual, and your code will last long after your bones are dust. Then there's your court. You've got it all: architects, calligraphers, mathematicians, chess masters, and a man named Piri Reis, who draws maps that look suspiciously like satellite images. And at the center, you, a ruler who reads poetry at breakfast and commands legions by lunch. You also meet Roxolana, born Alexandra, a Ukrainian concubine with eyes like intrigue and a mind sharper than your Janissary's blades. She isn't just a favorite, she becomes your wife, a legal, legitimate wife. Scandal. Ottomans don't marry concubines until you do. Historians still argue whether it was true love or the world's most elegant political move. Probably both. Roxolana becomes your advisor, your confidante, your co-ruler in everything but name. She builds mosques and charities, funds schools, and turns the harem from gossip theatre into a semi-formal boardroom. Meanwhile, your mother glares quietly in the background, trying not to plot anything too obvious. But it's not all poetry and power couple goals. Your best friend and grand vizier, Ibrahim Pasha, rises with you like a brother. You elevate him so high he practically becomes your shadow. And then you have him executed. Why? Paranoia? Politics? Maybe he redecorated your favorite room. The reasons are vague, but the message is crystal. Even sunshine casts dangerous shadows. Your architectural highlight reel includes Süleymaniye Mosque, a skyline-defining marvel designed by Mimar Sinan, your pet genius. It's not just a place of worship, it's an ego monument that whispers, Rome had its domes, but we add tiles. You also codify naval power. Under your Admiral Barbarossa, yes, that's his real name, the Ottoman fleet dominates the Mediterranean. You don't just own land, you lease the sea. Venice tiptoes around you. Spain sweats. North Africa joins the party. And yet even you can't stop time. As your reign progresses, cracks form. Your sons eye each other like rivals in a Shakespearean drama. You lean on Roxolana more than your generals would prefer. And when she dies, a quiet melancholy hangs over you, colouring your later years with the kind of loneliness no architect can plaster over. Still, when you finally pass at the ripe old age of 71, while on campaign, Naturally, you leave behind more than just conquests. You leave an empire at its cultural and territorial height. A civilization that reaches from Budapest to Baghdad, Cairo to Crimea, a state where Christians pay taxes, Jews run finance, and Muslims debate philosophy over lentil soup. Sleep now, Suleiman. Your laws outlast your battles, your verses outlast your rivals, and your empire, for a while at least, will continue believing it is infinite. You are, strangely enough, still Suleiman, or at least the echo of him, because this part of your reign, the one that doesn't get turned into gilded mosaics or admiring footnotes, is personal. Forget borders, forget siege engines and shimmering domes. This is about law, love, and the increasingly claustrophobic corridors of your own palace. See, you've married Roxolana. This isn't some royal fling or whispered affair. You put a ring on it, which for an Ottoman sultan is the equivalent of rewriting gravity. Concubines, normal. Wives, rare. Legal spouses, practically blasphemy. But you do it anyway, because she's not just enchanting, she's essential. The kind of sharp that slices through court politics like a scimitar through sherbet. And what do you get in return? Loyalty, yes, but also strategy. Roxolana reshapes the palace. She builds charitable foundations, soup kitchens, and women's hospitals. She wields the harem like a parliament of silk-robed whispers. And with every subtle maneuver, she teaches the empire that influence doesn't always wear armor. The harem itself, not what the travel tales say. It's not orgies and grapes. It's calculus, intrigue, and emotional hostage negotiation. Inside are hundreds of women, concubines, tutors, mothers, sisters, bound by ambition and hierarchy. Roxolana rises to the top, not by seduction, but by diplomacy that would make Machiavelli dab his eyes in pride. And the children. Ah yes, the sons. Ottoman succession is not a peaceful thing. There's no firstborn gets the throne rule. It's a full-blown state-sanctioned Hunger Games. The tradition, ancient, bloody, chilling, is that when a sultan dies, his chosen heir kills his brothers, all of them, quickly, just to keep things tidy. You've got multiple sons from multiple women, and soon enough, they're all watching each other like cats in a knife drawer. There's Mustafa, brilliant, beloved, and born of another concubine. He's your oldest and arguably the best candidate. But Roxolana has other plans. Her sons, especially Selim, aren't as impressive, but they have her guidance. Slowly, through suggestions, rumours, and possibly forged letters, she casts doubt on Mustafa's loyalty. You, tired and surrounded by whispers, believe them, and one day in a military tent near Konya, you order Mustafa strangled with a bowstring by your own guards. No trial, no farewell, just silence and silk. It haunts you. Of course it does. Historians still debate whether Mustafa was plotting against you, or just too competent for his own good. Either way, you've ensured the throne will pass to Selim, a man more interested in wine than policy, but he's Roxolana's, and that means, politically at least, he's safe. And while all this unfolds, you're still scribbling poetry. Your verses become more reflective, less imperial. They speak of longing, of aging, of battles internal rather than external. You, the conqueror of cities, now meditate on lost love and unspoken grief. It's enough to make a vizier uncomfortable. Your legal reforms continue too. You streamline taxes, clarify property laws, and ensure that justice flows at least more reliably than before. You're not inventing fairness, but you're formalizing it. Even peasants in far-off Anatolia start using the term kanun to mean law. Not divine decree, not tribal custom, just law, yours. And that's maybe your quietest triumph. While borders shift and mosques crack and dynasties falter, the laws endure. You make governance feel less like tyranny and more like architecture, something built, structured, designed to hold. But for now, you walk the polished halls of Topkapi a little slower, You pass the gardens where Roxana once sat, where your sons once played, where letters once carried meanings too heavy for parchment. You glance at the Bosphorus, that elegant line between continents and contradictions, and you wonder if anyone will ever truly understand the empire you built, or the price you paid to keep it. Sleep, lawgiver, your empire still sings, even if some verses are now written in regret. You are Selim now, not the thunderous Selim I, your grandfather, but Selim II. They'll call you Selim the Sot, which as historians speak for definitely enjoyed his wine. But let's be fair, you didn't ask to follow Selim in the Magnificent. You just inherited a mountain of expectations, a fraying empire, and a palace full of people who remember your father's verses better than your policies. Still, you have one thing going for you: delegation. You're smart enough to know you're not Suleiman, so you hire people who almost could be. Your Grand Vizier, Sakolu Mehmed Pasha, basically runs the empire while you, curate your leisure time. You retreat into art, music, and yes, wine, which, considering the official Ottoman stance on alcohol, is a little awkward, but rules are more like suggestions at your level. Under Sakolu's watch, the empire keeps chugging along. Trade expands, roads get built, the bureaucracy hums. You even commission a canal project to link the Don and Volga rivers, and another to connect the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, because why not reconfigure continents while sipping something fermented? And then there's Cyprus, a rich Venetian jewel in the sea, packed with sugar and Orthodox Christians. You decide, perhaps between refills, that it should belong to the empire, so you invade. The siege of Famagusta is brutal, even by Ottoman standards. It lasts nearly a year, ending with a bloodbath that includes the Venetian commander being flayed. Literally, not your best PR moment. But hey, Cyprus becomes yours. That counts for something. The problem is, this victory also triggers a backlash the size of a continent. Enter the Battle of Lepanto, 1570. The Catholic powers of Europe, tired of Ottoman expansion and Venetian humiliation, form the Holy League. Think Spain, Venice, the Papal States, and assorted Christian powers, who don't even like each other, but agree they like you even less. The fleets meet near the Gulf of Patras. You're not there, of course, you're somewhere more comfortable. But your navy faces off against Europe's, and it goes poorly. The Ottomans suffer a staggering defeat, hundreds of ships lost, thousands dead. For once, the Mediterranean belongs to someone else, if only for an afternoon. Historians still argue how much Lepanto actually mattered. Tactically, it was a massive blow. Symbolically, it was even worse. But strategically, you rebuild the fleet within a year. Because this is the Ottoman Empire, and you never let one defeat ruin your entire aesthetic. But cracks begin to show. Janissaries grow bolder, richer, less disciplined. Corruption seeps into the bureaucracy like water through stone. Your provincial governors act more like independent landlords than obedient stewards. The system still works, but it creaks. And culturally, you're still golden. Istanbul flourishes as a capital of art, literature, and ornamental fountains. You expand mosques, you support scholars, you fund charities, but the grandeur masks a slight, persistent decline, like a chandelier that still dazzles, but sways a little too much when the wind picks up. And when you die, probably after too many indulgences in your beloved Edirne, you leave behind an empire that still looks magnificent from a distance. The surface gleams, but underneath, the steel frame is starting to rust. You are no Suleiman. You didn't try to be, but you kept the machine running, and for that alone, you earn a page in the story, not as the strongest link, but the one that kept the chain from snapping too soon. So sleep now, Salem. Your wine glass is empty, your accounts are balanced, and your navy is mostly repaired. The sun still sets in an empire that bears your name, if only just. You are Murad III now, son of Selim II, and you've inherited not just the empire, but also its growing sense of unease. You sit on the Ottoman throne like a man who knows it might be tilting beneath him. You're pious, poetic, and perhaps a little anxious. Okay, very anxious. The empire still stretches from Algiers to Baghdad, but maintaining it is beginning to feel less like ruling and more like triage. The good news: you're cultured. You sponsor scholars, musicians, calligraphers, and astrologers like their Pokemon cards. Your court becomes a swirling galaxy of brilliance. You love beauty, elegance, symmetry. You're a poet yourself, composing verses that blend devotion with melancholy. Istanbul still dazzles. The libraries overflow. The empire's image remains spotless if you squint. But beneath that lacquered surface, problems multiply like Ottoman calligraphy, ornate, intricate, and impossible to erase. First, there's money. War is expensive, and you're constantly at war, with the Safavids in the east, with the Habsburgs in the west, with yourself every time you open a budget report. Inflation skyrockets, fueled by silver flooding in from the New World. Prices rise, salaries don't, and suddenly your janissaries are more interested in pensions than battles. You try to fix it, raise taxes, debase currency, squeeze the provinces, but it's like plugging leaks in a fountain with velvet. The bureaucracy bloats. Everyone wants a bribe. Governors turn tax farms into personal empires. And the peasants? Well, they grumble quietly, for now. Then there's the palace. Your harem explodes in size. You father over 100 children. Yes, 100, which is great for legacy but terrible for succession planning. Every son is a potential sultan. Every concubine a faction. Every hallway in Topkapi feels like a chessboard soaked in perfume and paranoia. And your mother, Nurbanu Sultan, remains a powerful force even after your father's death. She orchestrates, manipulates, maintains balance in the harem like a seasoned conductor, keeping chaos in tune. But when she dies, the real games begin. The court becomes a labyrinth of whispers, eunuchs, trade favors, letters are intercepted. A single rumor can shift imperial policy. Governance turns into theater, and everyone wants the lead role. Then there's the religious side. You're devout, perhaps overly so. You consult astrologers before campaigns. You ban alcohol with pious flair, though enforcement is spotty at best. You fund religious schools, commissions Quranic copies, build shrines. But the ulema, the Islamic scholars, begin gaining too much influence. Their opinions harden, their tolerance shrinks. The empire starts slipping from pragmatic flexibility into a more brittle dogma. And while all this churns, you fight the long Turkish War, a massive grinding conflict with the Habsburgs that drains treasure and lives for over a decade. Victory is elusive, battles are inconclusive, morale seeps away like heat in winter. Historians still argue whether it was worth it, whether these endless campaigns preserved imperial dignity or simply exposed imperial fatigue. Your death comes in 1595. In a palace grown weary of ceremony, you leave behind an empire still grand in silhouette, still mighty on maps, but increasingly misaligned. The machine works, but its gears grind louder. Decisions take longer. Fortunes shift faster. The Ottoman sun still shines, but now shadows fall longer at midday. Sleep, Murad. Your verses remain. Your empire survives. But a new kind of storm is coming. One born not from outside invaders, but from within the golden walls you tried to keep intact. You are Mehmed III now, the reluctant sultan, not reluctant in taking the throne. You wanted that, but in everything that comes after, because the first thing you do upon ascending, you kill your brothers, 19 of them, in one day. No trials, no goodbyes, just 19 tightly choreographed strangulations with silk cords. Not because you're evil, exactly, because that's how the system works. Brutal clarity, no heirs, no civil war. You weep, reportedly. Then you have lunch, because you're not allowed to pause long in this business of empire. The court holds its breath. No one says the word massacre aloud. Officially, It's a security measure. Privately, everyone realizes the Ottoman throne now comes with a blood-soaked clause in very fine print. Historians still argue whether this practice preserved stability or just traumatized the royal gene pool into timidity. Probably both. And you're no Suleiman, not even a Salim. You're cautious, withdrawn, a little too fond of incense and isolation. You rarely leave the palace. The empire goes to war, and you stay behind the lattice windows of Topkapi, listening to news brought by messengers who learn quickly not to deliver bad tidings with eye contact. The war you inherit, the long Turkish war, keeps dragging on like a dinner guest who won't leave. You eventually do something shocking. You lead the army personally. Mehmed III, bookish, hesitant, cushioned by velvet, rides out in 1596 to fight the Habsburgs. And against all expectations, you win at the Battle of Kerestes, mostly because of your generals and janissaries. But still, victory is victory. And yet you retreat afterward, never to lead again. One campaign is enough. Back to the palace, back to the harem, back to whispered intrigues and herbal remedies. Meanwhile, things start to feel off. Not disastrous, just frayed. The janissaries are restless, the ulema increasingly rigid. Inflation is now a background hum of misery. Local administrators skim a little more off the top each year, like corruption's a seasonal fruit. Peasants riot in Anatolia, forming rebel bands known as Kalale. Their leader claims to be a prophet, which is bad enough, but he's also good at ambushing convoys. Even worse. Inside Topkapi, the harem politics intensify. Your mother, Safiye Sultan, effectively runs the empire. She corresponds with foreign powers, approves appointments, redirects bribes. She's intelligent, ruthless, and dresses like diplomacy is a contact sport. Ambassadors begin addressing her with more caution than they do you. And then there's the obsession with tulips. Yes, tulips, not just flowers, symbols, status, aesthetic overload. Wealthy elites start cultivating them like they're growing Versailles in their gardens. The empire's upper crust leans into luxury with a desperation that feels like denial. The cracks are now everywhere, not large, not catastrophic, but unmistakable, the kind you see in fine porcelain hairline fissures that whisper of future collapse while the cup still holds tea. You die in 1603, relatively young, deeply tired. The empire continues, of course. That's the thing about institutions of this size. They can coast for decades on momentum alone. But your reign marks a shift. The Ottomans no longer feel inevitable. Glorious, yes, grand often. But beneath the turbans and crescents, anxiety has crept in. Rest now, Mehmed. You preserved the empire, if only barely. You made the hard choices your system demanded, and you left behind a court that still gleams, though increasingly the gleam feels like lacquer over fatigue. You are the Köprülüs now, not a sultan, but a family, a bureaucratic dynasty in turbans, a rescue mission in human form. The empire, bloated and dazed from decades of polite mismanagement, finally blinks and realizes it needs help. Not a new sultan, but someone who can actually govern. So they summon Mehmed Köprülü, a man with ice for blood, ledgers for dreams, and just enough ruthlessness to make silk gloves seem like iron fists. It's 1656. The janissaries are lounging more than drilling. The fleet is a floating rumour. Provincial governors operate like franchise owners. The economy is held together with IOUs and old poetry. And so the court gives Mehmed Köprülü full power, unprecedented, absolute, and most importantly, permission to do whatever it takes. Spoiler, he takes that very seriously. His first act, a purge. Heads roll, figuratively and literally. Corrupt officials disappear. Janissaries who forgot their soldiers are reminded via public executions. Taxes are collected with frightening efficiency. Ships are built, Armies are drilled, roads are paved, not for trade, but for troop movements. Suddenly the empire feels less like an elegant decline and more like a boot camp with excellent tile work. You, as Mehmed, don't play nice. But you do play fair, if your definition of fair includes silencing dissent with a hint of strangulation. Historians still argue whether you were a reformer or just the empire's most polite tyrant. Probably both. But what no one argues is that you worked. You didn't just stabilize the state, you gave it back its spine. And then you die. But don't worry, you trained your son Fazıl Ahmed Köprülü. Like a legacy software update, he inherits your post as Grand Vizier and continues the restoration project with a bit more polish and a lot more Latin. He's educated, charming, and alarmingly effective. Under his watch, the empire reconquers lost territory in Hungary, restores prestige in Europe, and even captures Crete after a siege that lasts more than 20 years. Yes, 20. Patience is a virtue, and also a military tactic. Fazıl Ahmed continues your policy of high standards and low tolerance. He sponsors science, literature, and the occasional philosophical salon, though always under the watchful eye of the ulama. He's not a revolutionary, he's a janitor with vision. He doesn't want to change the empire's soul, he just wants to mop up the mess and remind everyone to use coasters. Your family becomes synonymous with efficiency. After Fazıl Ahmed, other Köprülüs follow brothers, nephews, in-laws, each adding a new chapter to the empire's accidental golden echo. They suppress revolts, balance budgets, negotiate treaties, and keep the sultans in a pleasantly irrelevant bubble. Topkapi becomes a stage, and you, the Köprülüs, are the playwrights, directors, and occasionally the ushers, with daggers under their coats. But even your brilliance has limits. The deeper structural issues remain. The janissaries still grow fatter. The court still favours flattery over function. And the provinces, oh, the provinces, begin to hum with discontent. You can delay decline. You can't delete it. Still, for a few shimmering decades, the Köprülüs give the empire a second wind. Not flashy, not eternal, but competent, fierce, and oddly beautiful in its clarity. Like someone polished an old mosaic, just enough for the pattern to emerge again. Rest now, Mehmed. Rest, Fazıl. You weren't sultans, but you ruled. Not with birthright, but with spreadsheets and swords. And for that the empire owes you something rarer than gold, a little more time. You are Kara Mustafa Pasha now, Grand Vizier, commander of the Ottoman army, man with a mustache, so ambitious it has its own plans for Europe. It's the late 17th century, and you stand at the height of Ottoman power, or at least what still looks like the height if you tilt the map the right way. The Köprülüs have cleaned house, the empire is humming with relative stability, and you've got Vienna in your sights. Vienna, the Habsburg capital. A stubborn, well-defended pastry of a city that's been on the Ottoman wish list since Suleiman's day. Conquering it would complete your resume and possibly earn you a place in imperial legend, right between the guy who took Constantinople and that one sultan who fathered 112 children. So you gather an army, not just a tidy battalion or two. No, you march with an estimated 150,000 troops, siege weapons, auxiliary forces, even a mobile coffee operation. You approach Vienna like a man arriving at a very stubborn picnic. You surround the city in July 1683 and prepare to wait. You've done this before. Patience, numbers, and artillery. What could go wrong? Quite a lot, it turns out. The siege starts well. You dig trenches, launch cannonballs, cut off supplies. The Viennese starve and pray, sometimes in that order. Your troops settle in. Tents spread like a pop-up city, but then reinforcements arrive for them. A coalition army of Polish, Austrian and German troops, led by Jan Sobieski, the King of Poland, descends on your position like divine irony. And here's the kicker, they don't wait. On September 12, 1683, they attack directly, boldly, with heavy cavalry. the legendary Polish winged hussars charging down a hill like thunder in feathered armor. Your forces caught between siege and salvation, panic. The camp collapses, tents are abandoned, horses trample supplies. You flee, fast. Historians still argue why the siege failed. Was it overconfidence? Poor logistics? Bad timing? All of the above? But what's certain is that the defeat becomes mythic. The Ottomans don't just lose a battle, they lose momentum. Vienna is no longer a prize, it's a warning. You, Kara Mustafa, are summoned back to Istanbul, not to debrief, not to regroup, but to answer for your failure. The Sultan, less than thrilled with how things played out, orders your execution. Tradition is observed, strangulation by silk cord. You die in Belgrade, reportedly calm, as if accepting that great ambition sometimes requires a great fall. And after Vienna, the empire begins to contract. Not immediately, not dramatically, but visibly. Europe senses it. The Habsburgs push back. The Treaty of Karlowitz, signed in 1699, cedes Hungary and other territories to the Austrians. For the first time in centuries, the Ottomans negotiate from a position of weakness. But back to you, Kara Mustafa Pasha, the almost conqueror of Vienna. You gambled on glory and lost the board. Your name becomes shorthand for ambition undone, a cautionary tale told in coffeehouses from Istanbul to Krakow. And yet, your legacy is complex. You were competent. You were organized. You led the largest army the empire had fielded in decades. Your defeat wasn't inevitable. It was circumstantial, poorly timed, unlucky. You were inches from rewriting history. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Sleep now, Vizier. The siege failed. The tide has turned. But the empire still stands. For now. And in some strange way, your failure marks the beginning of its transformation from conqueror to survivor. You are now in the 18th century Ottoman Empire, a place of powder, porcelain, and polite illusions. The wars aren't as glamorous, the victories less certain, and the empire, well, it's still vast, still impressive, still collecting taxes across 3 continents. But you, dear listener, can feel it, can't you? The rhythm is slower, the carpet's a little worn at the edges. The orchestra plays on, but some of the instruments are out of tune. And here comes the tulip era. Yes, really. A period in Ottoman history so oddly serene, historians named it after a flower. From 1718 to 1730, under Sultan Ahmed III, the empire breathes finally, luxuriously, after years of cannon smoke, its peace with flair. You build pavilions, you commission art, you throw tulip parties at night where poetry is recited by lantern light and the elite compete for who can cultivate the weirdest looking bloom. Think Versailles, but with more fountains and fewer wigs. You, as Ahmed III, are not exactly a warlord. You prefer poetry to policy. You write verses under a pseudonym and obsess over calligraphy margins. Your Grand Vizier, Nevşehirli Damat Ibrahim Pasha, handles the gritty work, governing, managing money, building libraries, negotiating with Persians, fending off complaints from janissaries who miss stabbing things. The empire's capital, Istanbul, transforms. Public gardens flourish. Coffee houses multiply like gossip. Printing presses finally begin to spread books that aren't just Quranic recitations. There's an odd optimism in the air, like the empire might just modernize itself with pastries and polite correspondence. But don't relax too much. There's discontent brewing, particularly from the lower classes. The janissaries, once elite warriors, now act more like unionized bouncers. Merchants complain about taxes. Scholars grumble about European imports. And way out in the provinces, a man named Petrona Halil, a former janissary and part-time bathhouse attendant, starts stirring the pot. Then in 1730 it all bursts. Petrona leads a rebellion, armed with charisma, street support, and the ability to yell convincingly. He marches on Topkapi. You're forced to abdicate. The tulips are trampled. Your vizier is executed, and just like that, the empire wakes from its floral dream into something harder, grittier, less fragrant. Historians still debate whether the tulip era was a golden age or a gilded delusion. It did modernize certain things, architecture, urban planning, diplomatic norms, but it also alienated large swaths of the population. The empire was trying to be elegant when it needed to be functional. It danced when it probably should have jogged. But it's not all regress. The next sultans learn from the disruption. They start looking west, not just at Europe's wine and wigs, but at its military academies and administrative efficiency. The first steps toward reform are taken, not leaps, not revolutions, just steps, hesitant, cautious, sometimes immediately regretted, but steps nonetheless. And in the shadows of palaces and bazaars, a new idea starts to flicker, that the empire might adapt, not to become Europe, but to survive alongside it, to trade, negotiate, mimic where necessary, resist where possible. It's not about conquest anymore, it's about continuity. But oh dear listener, remember, the most dangerous moment for any empire isn't when it fights, it's when it pauses, when it looks in the mirror and starts thinking about skincare instead of security. The Ottomans in this era did both. So rest, Ahmed. Your tulips wilted, yes, but your gardens linger, and though the poetry faded from policy, the echo of those lantern-lit nights still hangs in Istanbul's air. You are Selim III now. No, not a gladiator, not a conqueror, but a thinker, a reformer, a dreamer with epaulets. The 18th century is behind you, and the empire's in need of more than pretty pavilions and nostalgic poems. You're stepping into the 19th century with a simple, terrifying realization. The world has changed, and the Ottomans haven't. Europe is galloping ahead. They've got steam engines, conscription, balance sheets, and opinions on civil rights. You've still got janissaries who can't be bothered to march in straight lines, and a bureaucracy that files reports in triplicate using the tears of unpaid scribes. You want to change that. You have to. So you launch the Nizami Sadid, the new order, a whole new army trained and dressed like Europeans, paid with European-style taxes, led by European-style officers who can actually read maps. Revolutionary, logical, also deeply offensive to the Janissaries, who by now have turned into a cross between a military guild and a particularly well-armed retirement club. The Janissaries smell change like cats smell thunder. They know what you're doing, you're replacing them, so they mutter. Then they organize. Then they riot. Istanbul erupts in 1807, and the Janissaries storm the palace. They don't just oppose reform, they want your head, your ideas, your neatly written budget reforms burned, and they succeed. You're deposed, imprisoned, then murdered, of course, because what's an Ottoman power transition without a little silk cord flair? But here's the twist. Your death isn't the end. It's the start of something that cannot be unthought. Your reforms, while crushed, plant seeds. Your supporters regroup. Your ideas, like a good song hummed by survivors, continue long after your voice is gone. Your cousin Muhammad II comes next, and he's learned. Oh, he's learned. Quiet, brooding, calculating. He watches the Janissaries, like a man inspecting an outdated appliance filled with gunpowder. He pretends to tolerate them. He waits. And in 1826, the waiting ends. Mahmud orders the creation of a new, modern corps. Again, the Janissaries rise again, but this time he's ready. He unleashes the artillery. Cannon fire in Istanbul. Janissary barracks burn. Bodies fill the streets. It's not just a crackdown, it's a purge. Historians call it the auspicious incident, which is a polite way of saying institutional execution with PR spin. And with them gone, the door opens. Mahmud starts cutting the fat. He abolishes the guilds, trims religious courts, modernizes the postal service, builds new schools, even rocks Western-style uniforms, Portraits of him begin appearing, scandalously showing his face. The empire is stepping cautiously, almost bashfully, into the modern age. But none of this would have been possible without you, Salim. You cracked the first window. You articulated what others feared to whisper, that survival now required change, even if it meant confronting centuries of tradition. Historians still debate how far you might have gone. Would you have implemented a constitution, built factories, abolished slavery? No one knows. You were cut short like a melody interrupted mid-phrase. So sleep now, reformer. The Janissaries silenced you, but the new order, your new order, echoes on. The empire is awakening, however groggily, from its golden, rusting dream. You are Mahmud II now. The Janissaries are dead, finally, gone like yesterday's empire. It only took centuries of tolerance, one particularly well-timed artillery barrage, and a public relations strategy that made mass execution look like institutional housekeeping. You stand now in the silence after the boom, looking at the ash of an old order, and you say, now we begin. But begin what? Because modernity is a slippery slope. You start by abolishing turbans. Next thing you know, you're building embassies in Paris and telling scribes to use paper from Vienna. You wear Western-style trousers, shockingly practical, disturbingly breathable. Your portraits circulate, portraits with your face. The ulema frown, the court gasps. You smile. Change is here. You build ministries, not harems. You centralize the treasury. You send students abroad to learn medicine, engineering, artillery disciplines, not just dogma. You know the empire can't just sip coffee and reminisce about Suleiman. It has to compete. But this isn't easy. The provinces, the provinces, they're squirming. Egypt, under Muhammad Ali, yes, the original one, acts less like a province and more like a startup ready for IPO. He modernizes faster than you do, builds an army that can take on yours, and politely informs you that Ottoman suzerainty is more of a decorative suggestion now. You try to rein him in. It doesn't go well. He ends up ruling Egypt like a monarch under Ottoman branding. The empire, still technically yours, begins to feel fragmented. Meanwhile, the bureaucracy thickens. You replace feudal systems with salaried officials, neat, efficient, very European. But you also create more officers than you know what to do with. Corruption doesn't vanish. It just starts speaking French. Every reform comes with its own loophole. Every new law spawns an exception. Then there's the army, the new one, the one you built after incinerating the Janissaries. It wears uniforms, marches in time, learns from Prussian instructors. It's not flawless, but it's professional. You've managed at last to build a force that obeys the state, not nostalgia. Culturally, you fund newspapers, literacy spreads. People read about taxes, wars, and terrifyingly, ideas. The empire begins to think aloud, and thinking, as it turns out, is contagious. But your reforms come at a cost. You're loved and loathed in equal measure. The ulema resent your secular shifts. Traditionalists mutter about lost glory. Even some reformers think you're too cautious. You're a tightrope walker with scissors in your hands, cutting ropes while trying to balance. Still, you press on. In 1839, you die, not in battle, not from poison or palace intrigue, but exhausted. You leave behind a blueprint, a scaffolding. The empire doesn't fall, it pauses, and then your son, Abdul Misid, picks up the baton and runs into the unknown. Historians still argue whether you saved the empire or just delayed its fate. You destroyed the Janissaries, yes, but did you replace them with something stronger or just shinier? Did your European reforms truly stick, or were they ornate masks on an aging face? But one thing's certain, you were the bridge, the last absolute monarch with old world instincts and new world curiosity. You burned down what no longer served, not out of malice, but out of survival. So rest now, Mahmud. Your empire still breathes. It limps, yes, but it breathes. And tomorrow, your son will promise liberty, equality, and justice, Ottoman style, of course. You are Abdul Maceed, I now, young, well-meaning, with cheekbones that look surprisingly constitutional. You've just stepped into your father's surprisingly polished shoes, and the empire, bloated, bruised, but still breathing, waits to see if you can actually pull off the next act. Spoiler, it's going to be a mixed review. You begin with a proclamation, the Tanzimat Fermanagh, the Imperial Edict of 1839. You don't just announce reforms, you practically sing them from the palace gates. Equality before the law, fair taxes, no more arbitrary executions. Everyone, Muslim, Christian, Jew, gets rights. In theory, anyway. It's like the Enlightenment, knocked on the sublime port, and you flung the door open with a welcome fruit basket. The Tanzimat reforms are sweeping. You create ministries that sound like they should have glass elevators. You draft civil codes. You build schools, modernize the army again, introduce Western-style uniforms, and sprinkle French throughout government offices like bureaucratic confetti. And here's the twist. These reforms aren't just decorative. You genuinely want an empire of laws, not just lineages. You dream of an Ottoman identity that transcends religion, a shared civic idea. Historians still argue whether this was idealism, pragmatism, or just a desperate effort to stop Europe from treating you like a feudal exhibit. Likely all three. But the reforms are expensive, so you take loans from European banks, lots of them, at rates that would make a Venetian blush. Istanbul glitters with boulevards, barracks, and opera houses, but the empire is now knee-deep in debt and oddly fond of British bond markets. And then there's Crimea. Russia decides to poke the empire again, this time under the guise of protecting Orthodox Christians in Ottoman territory. You resist, sort of, but it's not a fair fight. Thankfully France and Britain join in, not out of love, but fear that Russia might get too cozy with the Bosphorus. The Crimean War 1853-1856 is messy. It involves trench warfare, logistical nightmares, and more cholera than strategy. But you survive, more than survive, you win, technically. The Treaty of Paris recognizes your territorial integrity. You're now officially part of the European concert, which means you get invited to summits and judged for your wallpaper choices. Back home, the empire watches uneasily. Muslims grumble that reforms weaken Islam's primacy. Christians suspect it's all a ruse. Bureaucrats smile in public and sabotage in private. Corruption adapts to the new paperwork. And then there's the question of nationalism. Greeks have already bolt. Serbs are restless. Bulgarians murmur. Armenians eye the reform promises like coupons that never quite scan. Everyone wants recognition, autonomy, a little piece of the Ottoman mosaic to call their own. You, meanwhile, host foreign dignitaries with unsettling grace. You build Dolmabahce Palace, a neoclassical extravaganza that looks like Versailles went on a spice binge. It's beautiful, it's expensive, it leaks. You also flirt with constitutionalism, vaguely. You speak of equality, but stop short of actual elections. You want unity, but also loyalty. You juggle European approval and internal unrest like flaming torches, while riding a very nervous camel. And by the time you die in 1861, exhausted, slightly bankrupt, but still upright, the empire is both transformed and confused. The Tanzimat reform survive, though warped. The army is better dressed, if not always better trained. The legal system is layered like baklava, Ottoman law, Sharia law, European codes, and informal bribes, all coexisting uncomfortably. But you tried. You earn points for that. You reached for the impossible. A modern, multicultural empire built on principles, not privileges. The cracks are showing, yes, but so is the light. So sleep now, Abdul Maceed. Your hands are ink-stained from signing edicts. your eyelids heavy with compromise. The future is messy, uncertain, but thanks to you, it's still on the table. You are Abdulhamid II now. The last great Ottoman Sultan, or the first modern autocrat, depending on who's telling the story. The empire is fraying like a once grand tapestry, and your job is to stitch it back together while everyone's still arguing about the pattern. You ascend the throne in 1876 with a burst of hope. A constitution is proclaimed. Parliament opens. People whisper that the empire might finally be constitution, pluralistic, modern. For exactly 2 years it kind of is. Then comes the Russo-Turkish War of 1877. Russia invades under the pretense of defending Orthodox Christians in the Balkans, and it goes very, very badly for you. The Ottomans lose territory, prestige, and just enough self-esteem to trigger a deep existential crisis. The Treaty of San Stefano guts your Balkan holdings. Britain and Austria nervously intervene, reshaping the treaty at the Congress of Berlin, but by then the damage is done. And you slam the brakes on all this parliamentary nonsense. You suspend the constitution in 1878, dissolve the parliament, and embark on a personal rule that lasts over 3 decades. Welcome to the Istibdat, the era of absolutism, surveillance and velvet gloves with iron fingers. You're not idle, far from it. You centralize administration, improve railways, modernize the education system, expand telegraphs, build hospitals, and launch a pan-Islamic propaganda machine that makes even distant Muslims see the Caliph as relevant again. You present yourself as Halif-i-Muslimin, the Caliph of all Muslims, using religious authority to unify a deeply fragmented empire. But there's a shadow over everything. You rule like a man constantly expecting betrayal. Censorship is tight. Spies are everywhere. Printing presses tremble. You don't just suppress sedition, you crush whispers. Even your loyalists learn to nod carefully, like they're balancing secrets on their heads. And then there's the Armenian question. Nationalist movements rise across the empire, from the Balkans to the Caucasus. The Armenians, inspired by Europe and crushed by tax burdens, begin demanding autonomy. Protests turn into uprisings. Your response? Brutal. The Hamidian massacres of the 1890s leave tens of thousands dead. Historians still argue the scale, the intent, the culpability. What's certain is that a river of blood stains your reign. Meanwhile, the empire continues to shrink. Tunisia falls to France. Egypt is occupied by Britain. Still technically Ottoman, but in the same way a mannequin is technically a person. The Balkans churn with rebellion. The great powers, Britain, France, Russia, circle like elegant, overdressed vultures. And yet, in many ways, you're successful. You build the famous Hijaz Railway, connecting Damascus to Medina, a feat of engineering and religious symbolism. You invest in industry, science, and even quietly admire aspects of Europe, though never enough to let it touch your throne. You balance the Ottomans like a teacup on a cannon. Every movement calculated, every reform double-checked for threats. You understand power, not as idealism, but as maintenance, not as transformation, but as postponement. But time doesn't pause. A new generation rises, educated in your schools, reading forbidden books under candlelight. They call themselves the Young Turks, and they want a constitution, a parliament, a return to the promise of 1876. They want the empire to be a nation, not just a throne. In 1908, they succeed. The Young Turk Revolution forces you to restore the constitution. Parliament returns, and for a brief moment, it looks like the empire might reinvent itself again. You pretend to embrace it. You smile, wave, quote poetry. But a year later, when conservative forces try to stage a counter-coup in your name, you're blamed. Parliament dethrones you in 1909, and you're sent to live in quiet exile in Thessaloniki, then Istanbul. You die in 1918, weeks before the empire does. not with fire and fanfare, but quietly, as the world reshapes without you. Rest now, Abdul Hamid. You held the center longer than anyone thought possible. You slowed the fall, even if you couldn't reverse it. Your reign was stained, complex, obsessive, and unforgettable. You are now in the crumbling twilight of empire, wearing the tattered uniform of Mehmed the Sixth, the last Sultan of the Ottomans. And not the poetic kind of last, the actual terminal. This is the end chapter. It's 1918, and the empire that once spanned 3 continents is now reduced to diplomatic begging, borrowed uniforms, and nervously counted stamps from foreign officers. The First World War has just ended, and let's be honest, you bet on the wrong horse. You joined the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, because you thought, well, they look organized and mildly terrifying, but it didn't go well. Gallipoli was a rare bright spot, yes, but the rest of the war? A slow-motion demolition. The empire bled from every front. The Arab revolt shattered illusions of loyalty. The British walked into Jerusalem like it was already theirs, and the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret deal that sliced the Middle East like a wedding cake between colonial guests. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 is your empire's funeral invitation, wrapped in legalese and sealed with foreign signatures. The Allies carve up your lands. Greece moves into Izmir. The Armenians dream of independence. The Kurds are mentioned, vaguely. The French and British divide Syria, Iraq and Palestine like brunch options. You're left with a humbled Istanbul and some paperwork. But as always, history isn't done just because the map changes. In Anatolia, a storm brews. A former Ottoman officer named Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk, refuses to accept this dismemberment. He forms a resistance. He rallies war-weary peasants, sidelined soldiers, and disillusioned officers. He builds a new army, not of conquest, but of survival. You, back in Istanbul, try to maintain appearances, issue proclamations, hold Friday prayers. But your sultanate has become a ghost office, and Ankara, the rebel capital, is gaining legitimacy. By 1922, the Turkish War of Independence is won. The Allies are pushed out. The Sultanate is officially abolished. You, Mehmed VI, are escorted onto a British warship and exiled to Malta. Yes, Malta, the throne you once dreamed on, now reduced to a folding chair and second-hand tea. And just like that, the Ottoman Empire, after 600 years of dynasties, conquests, architecture, intrigue and reforms, ends. No bang, no sword fight, no explosion, just a boat pulling away from a city that no longer needs its sultans. Historians still argue who's to blame. Was it the Janissaries, the Western powers, the sultans too late to modernize, the reformers who dreamed too quickly? Perhaps all of them, or perhaps it was simply time. But one thing's for sure, the empire ends not with fire, but with a decision, a choice by a new generation to be something else. So rest now, Mehmed, you were the last, and that, in its own way, is historic. The curtain falls, the call to prayer fades into a republic, and the world moves on. You are now no one, and everyone. You are the ghost of an empire, drifting across mosaics, minarets, and dusty corridors once walked by sultans and servants alike. The Ottoman Empire is gone, dismantled, rebranded, written into textbooks and tourist brochures. But you still linger, in architecture, in music, in the smell of spices curling through Istanbul's alleys at dusk. It's 1923. A new nation is born, the Republic of Turkey. Secular, Western-facing, led by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the soldier who rose from the trenches to redesign a civilization. He abolishes the caliphate in 1924. Yes, the caliphate, the thing that once made Ottoman sultans spiritual leaders of millions, gone with a signature. The fez, banned, the Arabic script, replaced by Latin, mosques repurposed, palaces turned into museums. The past, Ataturk decides, must be respected, but only from a safe, manageable distance. You, as the Ottoman ghost, watch this transformation like an aging actor attending the premiere of a reboot. The set looks familiar, the names are changed, the lines are punchier, and no one asks for your autograph anymore. But echoes remain, in Sarajevo's bridges, in Cairo's dialect, in Greek lullabies that still use Turkish words, in the smell of cardamom in Damascus. The empire, for all its flaws and glories, left fingerprints everywhere. Language, law, cuisine, memory, trauma. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman Empire was a bloated relic or a multicultural masterpiece. Was it too tolerant, too autocratic, too slow, too ambitious? Did it collapse because of internal stagnation or external betrayal? Was its decline inevitable or self-inflicted? The truth, as always, is tangled. The Ottomans were not a fairy tale. They were not villains or saints. They were human, brilliant, flawed, adaptable, stubborn. They conquered, legislated, enslaved, liberated, composed, and prayed. They lasted 6 centuries, not by accident, but by evolving, sometimes slowly, sometimes violently, always imperfectly. And now you, dear dreamer, drift through this empire's memory, not as a ruler or a rebel, but as a witness. You've walked beside Suleiman through smoky battlefields. You've dined with poets in Topkapi. You've heard the screams at Lepanto and the silence in Dolmabahce Palace. You've watched reformers be crushed and tyrants grow old. And you've seen how power, like perfume, always fades, but never disappears completely. The empire is gone, yes, but if you listen closely, in the hush before morning, you can still hear the call to prayer across its invisible borders. You can feel the weight of its story in every stone mosque, every border drawn with shaky colonial hands. Rest now, traveller. You've seen the rise and fall of one of history's grandest illusions. The Ottomans are asleep. Their dreams live on in maps, myths, and memories. And tomorrow, perhaps, you'll awaken with new eyes, having wandered through a world once ruled by silence and silk, by tulips and treaties, by brilliance and blood,